Hey everybody, it is Sunday, August 30th. We're almost through August, which I don't know about the rest of you. It was a combination of it being incredibly fast, too fast, but also just a couple of months in and of itself. Um, we got a lot to talk about tonight, unfortunately. Um, I like to be honest about what's going on. I've said it before. I think we celebrate our wins and we understand our losses and we understand when things are up and when things are bad. This is one of those things that we have to talk about. Is what this week represented and where we are. Because if we don't grapple with where we are and if we don't understand the situation, it's only going to get worse. And this was a this was a bad week for America. Just a just a really shit week for America. Um, it was bad enough, obviously, with what has happened with Kenosha, and I was covering the Republican National Convention, which some of you hung out with, and I'm glad that you did. Um, Watching the Republican Party stoke not just racial paranoia, but like continue to fester in this alternate reality that it's the only place where they can win an election, the only place where they can enact power over everyone, was really hard and disgusting. And on top of that, just like one crime committed after another, just one Hatch Act violation and ethics problem after another. It wore me out in a big way. But then, obviously, what happened in Kenosha and what's happened around both the shooting, but also the right wing militant. And then, there was a part of me, and I've been covering this stuff for a while, and I've been like one of the people who's been like, oh, things are really bad, and you need to understand how bad they are, and you really need to wrap your head around how bad this is, and um, not sugarcoat it because it's dangerous when we pretend like it's not happening and that things are fine and that everything is normal. And I'm not one to really hide behind false hope, but the way the Republican Party closed ranks around this kid was one of those moments that I don't know if y'all do this, but it's like there things happen so quickly in the modern world that like sometimes in order to sort of wrap your head around it or to like really understand it, you have to like take a little snapshot of it, right? And you're like, no, this is an important moment. Them closing ranks around that kid was something that has been a long time coming. Um, it was like one of those things where you had the MAGA bomber, obviously, who was inspired by Donald Trump to try and wipe out the entire Democratic leadership, plus also members of the media, anybody that they saw as a opponent of Trump. And we've seen violence and all that stuff, but the Republican Party has tried to sort of keep a distance. And obviously, Charlottesville is one of those moments where Trump couldn't keep a distance. He was asked about it repeatedly, and all he could do was say there were good people on both sides, and obviously go after Antifa or whatever. This was an active embrace of this kid, and then what we've seen over the past couple of nights, and I believe there's a caravan of MAGA people right now heading to, I want to say it was Los Angeles. I don't know if it's getting ready to happen in Portland tonight. I have to assume that it is, but what we've seen with them going in and not just assaulting people, but like outfitting their trucks for assaults. And not only is Trump endorsing it, but he is promoting it. And it's one of those things where I'll be honest with you, I've been watching this Trump movement take shape for years now. And I was trying to tell people back in 2016 when I was sneaking into rallies and talking with the supporters. I tried to tell everyone, I was like, listen, people right now are getting hurt. People are getting beaten up. People are getting threatened. If this ends without a lot of blood in the streets, we'll be incredibly lucky. This was one of those moments that I didn't want to be right, and I didn't want to feel like I had any place in reality even saying any of that stuff. But it's becoming obvious, and this is something that I want to talk about very quickly. And there's a bunch of questions about this, so I'm going to iterate it through the questions, but I want to state it very plainly for people, because this is a thing that one of the problems is that we misunderstand America. And obviously we have, a lot of us, been raised within American exceptionalism and the myth of it, and this idea that somehow or another America is inoculated from fascism and authoritarianism, and that those things can't happen here. The truth is that we are uniquely susceptible to it. That myth of exceptionalism actually makes us incredibly susceptible. But one thing that we don't understand about society, because we take it for granted, we go to the store, we buy groceries, we, do our things, we live our lives, we go to our jobs. All these things are social constructs, and they can be changed, they can be shifted, they can be perverted, they can be ruined. And one thing that happens in societies is the myth of the individual and the myth of the group can take over things. And so what ends up happening is parts of populations start to see themselves as different members of different populations. We don't really take a look at the Civil War very in depth, because that's what ends up happening actually in the Civil War, is the North and the South start seeing themselves as completely different types of people, particularly the South, because they were engaged in these conspiracy theories and paranoia. You see it around the world, and it happens constantly. And it happens mostly in places of crisis. And you need to understand that America is in a place of crisis. We're in decline right now. That doesn't mean that America is falling. It doesn't mean that we are completely done, although signs are saying that we are in decline. In moments of decline, there is a moment of crisis, and it depends on who takes over and who does what with it. And in this case, we have a division of who Americans think that they are, and we have a group, particularly in Trump and the Republicans, who are sowing those divisions for political power and profit. What ends up happening, and this is the sad truth, if you actually look throughout the world in places where civil wars take place, ethnic cleansing, genocides, there are these moments where men get their guns, they get in trucks, they get in cars, they go into villages, they go into places where they think that they're going to fight the other, somebody who isn't, them, the outside group. And they go in and they go in and they kill people. I hate to tell you this, but that is the moment that we're resting on right now. It doesn't mean that we're going to descend in genocidal ethnic cleansing. It doesn't mean that we're going to have a new civil war. But it does mean that those things are possible. And we need to operate with the understanding that those things are possible, and that the conditions are there, and that Trumpism and the Republican Party, they behave in ways that could make these things more likely to happen. They're more than willing to push the envelope, and they're more than willing to try and do all this stuff. It doesn't mean they're trying to have a civil war. It doesn't mean they're trying to get people killed, but they don't mind. It's like I say this all the time on the Muckrake podcast. It's like a corporation selling cigarettes. They know that their products cause cancer. They know that these are problems, but they go ahead and they do it because there's profit to be made. There's power to be had. But we're inching up on something really bad. And the reason you feel bad is because I think you feel it. And it's instinctual, and there's no way to deny it. It's where we are, and it's who we are right now. That doesn't mean it'll be permanent. That doesn't mean that we can't figure this thing out. I keep trying to say on these streams, we're on the precipice of something. That something can be very, very bad, and that something could be very, very good. This is a lot. This is it's a canary in the coal mine type situation, and we've seen it. Those of us who are experts in this stuff, and those of us who have researched it, we've been seeing these canaries in the coal mine constantly. It's like armed men showing up in legislatures. It's this rampant corruption. It's this cruelty. It's all of it. But we need to understand that America is in a fundamentally different place. We are at a moment of crisis. And you need to understand that. You have to understand that this is not a moment where it's actually innocuous. This is a really charged moment. In the next few months, we're only at the end of August. We're only at the end of August. We still have a few months for this thing to go. The temperature is going to get turned up. I tweeted this the other day. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Huffington Post put out a report. There have been 500 incidents of Trump supporters either harassing or attacking or murdering or injuring protesters. There have been 500 incidents. We don't talk about it in the media because we don't want to talk about white nationalism, and we don't want to admit that we're at a moment of crisis. We don't connect the dots because we don't like to connect the dots on white crime, because then all of a sudden you got to talk about white privilege, and then the meritocracy starts falling apart, and then the economy starts being put in trouble, and we start thinking about changing the system. They've called a lot of us alarmists for years. They called us grifters. They called us alarmist. That's always what happens. It's what happens when a country sinks into the authoritarian abyss. The people who start screaming about it, they get vilified. They really do. And I have to say before we move forward, because there's a lot of questions, a lot of really good questions tonight, but they're serious questions. So before we get going, and I've resolved, because I don't think there's any way to fight this fight by becoming nihilistic or becoming consumed by the hatred that consumes these people. I have made it my decision that everything that I do in this, I'm going to fill with some hope. I can't go in here and just tell you this is like sackcloth bad and black and terrible and there's no hope whatsoever. So I will say this. I'm so glad that you're here. And I am so glad that you come here on Sundays. And I have to tell you, I've been a critic of this administration. I've been one of those people who's been sounding alarms for years. This week scared me too, because this is a frightening time. And even if you know what's happening, it doesn't mean that it's not frightening. So I want to say before we get going, cheers. Appreciate all of you. All right, let's start off. Monday. And by the way, let's start off, with some happiness. My question is, the Reichstag fire was a pivotal moment in Hitler securing power in Germany. Or Germany. Are we facing a similar situation right now? Perhaps the potential for bombing / extremist violence. All you have to do is go and look at Putin's Russia. And one of the ways that Putin consolidated power was that there were these bombings that were a little suspicious. These bombings were obviously carried out by Russian intelligence. They were what you would call false flag operations that allowed him to crack down on people and consolidate power. I would not put that past Donald Trump. I wouldn't in a heartbeat. I mean, I've heard enough reports coming out of the Black Lives Matter protest movements. There were people obviously instigating things there. I think white nationalists, white terrorists, white extremists, whatever you want to call them, they were trying to escalate things to the point where America would come apart and there would be widespread violence and civil war and a white ethno state and all that stuff. I don't think that the chance is zero that they won't try and use this. They have the perfect moment right now. They have tons of cultural momentum. They have tons of support among Trump and MAGA people. They have a president who may not even understand what white supremacy is, but he embodies it naturally. That's who he is. They don't want to lose that. They don't want to lose that president. So there's a possibility they might do something. People have told me that the church that got burned in D.C., that there was more proof that white supremacists did it than there were protesters. So yeah, there's always the potential for some sort of manufactured violence. I would say that, like everything, and by the way, one of the things I always try and put out here in either live streams or podcasts or talks or what, take everything with a grain of salt. It doesn't matter where you're getting your news. It doesn't matter if it's CNN, MSNBC. Do not just openly accept everything. These corporate news media places, they will jump on a story as soon as there's flesh on the bone. So just be careful. Just be very, very careful with what happens and any reactions that happen, because this country has a real history of there being a moment of disaster and suddenly there is like a manufactured will. I mean, this is like a September 11th type thing where all of a sudden it's like everybody in America, particularly as they're being mobilized by media and politicians, suddenly everyone is like, no, destroy everyone in the Middle East and go to war and do whatever you want and just, stomp on our constitutional rights. America is primed for something really, really bad and something like that. And it wouldn't take much for it to happen. Annika says, will today's comments by Ted Wheeler regarding violence incited by Trump's militia amount to a real wake-up call to Americans regarding mounting fascism? Annika, I hope you're here, and I appreciate your question, but I don't think so. Ted Wheeler, and here's the thing. I don't even think Wheeler's been all that great. I think he's had problems in all of this, but the fact that he spoke out in the way he did means that he will be automatically put in the category of being an enemy of Donald Trump. So he's part of the deep state, and that will be it. Yeah, I mean, right now, anybody who speaks out is on one side, and everybody else is on the other side. I would love it, and I think this would be something that Ted Wheeler could do. Ted Wheeler could come out with a mea culpa and just be like, I am sorry that I gassed citizens of Portland and that I caused these problems. And now that I'm looking at this and the things that are happening, I feel bad about what I've done, and now I need to reconsider it. I think that would be more helpful. Real fast, Alex says, do you have a take on whether protesters are delusional/selfish? That's a hard thing to answer. There are a lot of people who keep asking me, do I think that we should be protesting right now, and does it throw fuel in the fire for Trump? I say that if you are facing fascism, you have to speak out against it. So I'm all for protesters doing that. The question is whether or not they are making a difference or whether or not they're changing opinion. They certainly did during the BLM movement. We saw the polls move. It wasn't necessarily the protesters' fault that the media stopped paying attention and the politicians stopped acting on it, and that the Democratic Party didn't seize the moment or the bully pulpit or the will of the nation. But yeah. Dialectical Diatima says, unpopular tactical thought. Here we go. The right and Trump are looking to bait us into a fight because they know instability and chaos will be painted as a country who needs to vote for a strong man. It would be smart just not show up in response to them trying to start shit. Here's the problem. If we don't show up and if we don't tell everyone that this is wrong, then we give the illusion that this is okay. The media has been complicit in this. They've had Trumpists on one after another to tell their lies. They've normalized Donald Trump. They've normalized Trumpism. They have, basically said any of us who have been calling this fascism and authoritarianism, oh, they're overreacting and oh, they're hysterical. The problem is the moment that people stop showing up and they stop protesting in the face of all of this stuff, it makes us complicit. It makes it seem like the country is okay with it. And the problem is that America, the myth of America and the way that America is operated, it makes it seem already as if we are complicit because the myth of America makes this whole thing possible. Real fast, and we're going to talk about fascism in a minute, but you need to understand that fascism is a weaponization of the myth of the past. Every time it says, oh, things used to be so much better and you've been betrayed, and as long as we can get back to what it used to be. The myth of America is what holds us captive. It's the thing that keeps us from making this country better, and it's the thing that keeps us from agreeing on reality, because Trumpists are weaponized and radicalized and denying actual reality. They don't want to believe stories about the past, and they don't want to believe where we are right now. They want their old past. They want that myth. They love it, and they need it, and they don't want to let go of it. Ham and Cheese says, why does the media insist on calling people who show up to oppose BLM rallies counter-protesters instead of white supremacist sympathizers? Okay, so here's the problem with the way the media covers all of this shit. The problem is the moment they start saying white supremacist is the moment that the entire game is over. If you, as like a very influential and wealthy broadcaster, or a pundit, or a cable news show host, or, whoever, a politician, whatever, if you start talking about white supremacy, then all of a sudden you start calling into question the meritocracy. That means that this country is riddled through not just with prejudice and racism, but that the things that are happening in this country are directed by it. So the moment that you start talking about white supremacy, you have to start going throughout history and completely reimagining what you think about how we got to the place that we are and where we're going. These people are very wealthy. They're very powerful. They're very influential. If they got to a place of power and wealth and influence in a flawed system, what's that say about them? If all of a sudden they start questioning the meritocracy, doesn't that mean that maybe they got to where they are because the meritocracy is broken, or possibly because white supremacy? They also, and this is the problem, is psychologically, cognitive dissonance will not necessarily allow you to start investigating those kinds of giant ideas, because all of a sudden you have to start questioning like who you are, the decisions you've made, how you've gotten to where you are, what you've done to other people. And the cognitive dissonance sort of sets there as a guard. So the moment that these people start coming in, you have to start questioning, what is America and what has America been? And if there are paramilitary groups and neo-fascists in the streets, then doesn't America have something in its past that made that possible? And then all of a sudden, when you start investigating that, you start figuring out that American history is completely riddled through with fascist ideas, white supremacy, and the meritocracy is a complete and utter joke. So yeah, the media is not up to this moment. John, how bad can it get? Really? How bad? Pretty damn bad. Pretty damn bad. The precipice I was talking about, I have to be honest with you. We're in a really bad moment in world history. And the reason we're in a bad moment in world history is not just because the old systems are failing and they're failing spectacularly, but we're in a really bad place because neo-fascism and authoritarianism and kleptocracy are they're doing really well. It's like in Russia. Putin has created this completely three-dimensional postmodern system of oppression where when you look at it, it looks like a society where people have rights, but then, you just barely dig down underneath the surface, and obviously people don't, but they're also afraid to use their rights. That is just the absolute dream for an authoritarian. You also, of course, have technology, such as in China, that has created an authoritarian state where people are oppressed by means of technology and technological oppression. It could get really bad here. It could get really bad here. And to extrapolate it out, I want you to think about the shooting in Kenosha. 2 people were murdered in the street, another person maimed. The right just jumped on board because they truly believe that they're in a war and that this 17-year-old kid was a soldier in a war. Well, what's 2 deaths in a war? What's 100 deaths in a war? What's 1,000 deaths in a war? This is how you look throughout history and you find one genocide and ethnic cleansing after another that kills thousands, if not tens, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. I don't think that's necessarily where we're going, but you need to understand that Trump and the right are not going to buckle under the pressure of this thing. They're going to push it because it's the only play that they have. It's like they're gamblers and they've got bad hands, but they're willing to play it until, all the cards are on the table. It could get really bad. And we need to understand that it can get really bad. And if we understand it can get really bad, we'll fight this thing the way we need to fight it. But it could get really bad. April says, can you draw any comparison between Trump and Francisco Franco? I absolutely can. These authoritarian, murderous fascists, they're willing to do whatever to keep power. I mean, eventually at some point, you don't really care about people that you kill. You don't really care about rights that you trample. You just care about holding on to power. And it just becomes part of your daily life and part of your daily actions. I would also point out, and this was really disturbing for me. This was actually this was a fundamentally important moment in my life, in my analysis of politics. I was at this bed and breakfast. It was years ago. I want to say it was like 2006 or something like that. Maybe it was 2007. I don't know. But I was at this bed and breakfast, and this nice couple who hosted the bed and breakfast, and the people who host those types of things, they like to tell stories about their travels, and they like to hear about where people are from or whatever. They like to, have conversations and perform for the people who were there. And they just kept talking about Franco and about how wonderful Franco was. And all of a sudden it started to be this thing where like my wiring started having to deal with this idea that Americans would ever praise a fascist. But of course, I was raised up in a family where like some people would occasionally be like, oh, Hitler had some good ideas and Mussolini made the trains run on time. And all of a sudden I started drawing the lines that America was not immune to fascism. And it's one of these really gross things that this country, a lot of people in this country are set up to do it. And that America has a history of flirting with fascism over and over and over again. I mean, if Pearl Harbor might not have happened, God knows what could have happened in this country. I mean, we were in the grips of like fascistic fever. We had eugenicists left and right who were, sterilizing people, and they were going over to Germany and advising them. And, you know, we had people who were calling for a white union with Germany, including Charles Lindbergh, who was gathering power. I mean, the America First Party was gaining tons of power. But we're very susceptible here. We really, really are. Kristen says, I see the talk of civil war more and more on Twitter and other social media platforms. I've read journalists saying our current political environment is similar to their experiences of reporting on the fall of other countries. Do you agree? Yeah, I agree with that. And again, that's not because I can see the headlines now. It's like Twitter writer says civil war imminent or something. I don't think it's imminent, but I think we're seeing, you know, it's like a weather front coming through. It's weird. A front is coming here in Georgia. It's been incredibly hot all day, and I can feel it cooling down, so I understand the weather front is coming through. You start seeing these telltale signs. You start seeing that there is a possibility for, like, sectarian violence. You start seeing the possibility of civil war. You start seeing this idea, like, I mean, you know, nobody before the Civil War necessarily thought it was going to happen, although there was, like, a live war brewing in, like, Kansas. I mean, there was blood being drawn. In the 1960s and 1970s, we were on the precipice of another situation like that. Although it's been run through the filter of, like, you know, conventional history, where it's like hippies in the streets and the National Guard killed them once, and that was all that happened. No, there were bombings left and right. There were right-wing gangs, like, going out and just cracking heads. I mean, we've been on the precipice of this stuff in the past, and it doesn't mean that it's imminent. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but absolutely, it reflects what has happened in other countries, particularly in countries where, like, genocides and ethnic cleansings have happened. Ricker says, what strategy would you employ? Read the caravans clearly designed to start violence. I want them to know we stand in resistance to them, but I also don't want the seemingly inevitable violence to become sound bites and campaign ads. That's the hard thing, right? The problem here is that you have to draw attention to it, and you have to draw a line in the sand between fascism and shared society. That's a hard thing. I think you go out there, but I think at the same time, I think you have to not engage in violence with these people. I mean, one of the things that we see in a lot of these videos and stuff is that these people are just going out and they're just brutalizing people, and in some cases they are they're murdering people. I think it's one of those situations where any sane person watching the video has to understand that this is an attack, that it is a bit of street violence, like the kinds of things that you would see with brown shirts or, you know, the SA. Yeah, I would vehemently oppose them. I would vocally protest them, but I would not allow anybody to try and even begin to twist what is happening. But we all know that the right will do what they'll do. The Crucianeer says, these crises were not prevalent in the early years of the administration except for Charlottesville. Will the electorate fall for this strategy? Has the false call for law and order overshadowed the failed pandemic response? It absolutely overshadows it. He's changed the conversation. I don't know how many thousands were over 180 right now. I want to say it's like 184 or something like that. Maybe 185. I don't know. Yeah, the conversation we're having is like Trump saying to everyone, like, and he doesn't say it specifically, because this is what Trump has always done. And this is what I was always talking about at his rallies. He always tiptoes up to saying the thing, and then he allows everyone else to say it. These videos and ads and tweets that you see, which is like, this is Joe Biden's America or whatever. What Trump is running on is that he's saying we're nearing a cultural civil war. You want me in the White House because I'll be your warrior. That's what he's saying, is that things are getting violent and I need to be your warrior. And it is it's one of those things that's the message. There's no other message. There couldn't possibly be another message. He not only screwed up the pandemic response, he just absolutely refused to act. He carried out a democide or a genocide, whatever you want to call it, on Democrats and liberals and so-called blue states. He made governors engage in fealty to even get PPE, and he wrecked the economy, top to bottom. And all he has to offer now is violence, and that's what he's offering. He's offering violence. Wobbly said, do you think what we saw last week, the RNC, Pompeo, Russian-esque use of active duty Marines, which, by the way, how gross was that with the Marines and him walking through the doors? I mean, just shocking. Just what a shocking, disgusting display. Was a Reichstag fire event. Did we witness the full takeover, teardown of our current democratic system and installation of a dictatorship? I think there's a couple of histories that could be written here. On one hand, if Trump gets his way and he installs a dynastic authoritarianism, which, by the way, is what was on display at the RNC. I mean, either Ivanka or Donald Trump Jr. are going to vie for the presidency if this goes through. And Trump wasn't lying when he said he'll serve 12 more years after these 8. Like, that's what he wants to do. Like, listen to him. He's not joking about any of this stuff. There's a history where he succeeds, and the RNC that we watched, it's like, oh yeah, like, see it on display. This is what it's going to become, and this is where our country is going. But there is another history where he doesn't succeed, and we actually rise to the occasion, and we affect real change, and we actually fight this thing back, and we make something truer and realer, and we look back on this thing, and we're like, let's never let it get back here. And that's the hope, right, is that all of this stuff will be like this high watermark of corruption and disgusting behavior. It's like Watergate, right? If you reach Watergate levels, like, you've gone way too far. And hopefully Donald Trump will become that high watermark for corruption and just kleptocracy. And it'll be a thing where it's like, don't you ever even come close to this thing again. Recognize it. Jeff says, what lengths do you think Trump will go to in order to challenge the election results? Everyone. Absolutely every possibility. I mean, we've all seen the war game result of a bunch of people who were skeptical of the idea that Trump would possibly do anything. He'll do anything. He'll do anything. Steven says Tom Cotton is next. Tom Cotton wants to be next. And there's a lot of Republicans who want Tom Cotton to be next. And I can tell you right now, Tom Cotton is a straight up fascist. The question is whether or not he'll be able to give them that extra little trump, right? That's the problem, is that there are a lot of people like Tom Cotton who they're trying to reverse engineer Donald Trump. They're trying to understand what he's done, and they're trying to understand how Donald Trump has gotten away with what he's done, and they're trying to use it to a real ideology. The question is whether or not the two are compatible, that ideology and Trumpism. That remains to be seen, and God help us. Cheers if that ever happens. That'd be a rough time. Yeah, I saw Michael Moore predicting a Trump win. I'll be honest with you. I think Michael Moore, I think that's his role. I think once you get to a certain place of power and wealth and notoriety, you start becoming a character. And I think that he got so much attention for predicting the first Trump win that this is what he's doing now. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump is going to win. That doesn't mean he's going to necessarily be right again, but that is what Moore functions as. Michael Moore's entire thing is trying to get people to pay attention to the working class poor in the Midwest. That's what he's always tried to do, and that's what he's trying to do now. He's saying you need to pay attention to them for the re-election, which, by the way, I think the Democratic Party does need to do that. But the way Moore goes about it is obviously it's theatrical, right? Okay, Tunnel 43 says, how do you see the reopening of schools / colleges playing out as that effort broadens in September? I'm feeling salty tonight. Feeling a little bit salty tonight, so I'll answer this truthfully. I'm in Georgia, and we have colleges down here that already like 20% of the student body is either infected or in quarantine. The cases here in my small college town have just skyrocketed. God knows what the numbers coming out tomorrow are going to look like. Unfortunately, it's going to be a blue and red state thing. If you are in a red state with a Republican governor, they're going to be in complete denial of science and reality. They're probably going to try and hush up any numbers that look bad, but they're not going to shut down things. And actually, I see someone else asked about whether or not things are going to shut down again. They're not. They're just not going to shut it down again. The only thing that they have left in their deck is fear and denial and violence. That's it. And they're just going to deny this thing. They're going to hope that the economy somehow or another gets better, which, it's not really, although the economy is tuned to hurt us more than it's tuned to help us. They're going to throw us into the jaws of a generational pandemic. It's what they've already done. It's what they're going to keep doing. And they're going to hope that we're going to become numb to it, which someone has asked about here in a second. I'll answer that in a second. Jones says, I can't shake the feeling that Trump will send his militia stormtroopers and cult with guns to the polls and flat out force people to vote for him or die. or have the USPS destroy our ballots, and the cops will let them do it all too. Here's my prediction. I don't know how widespread it's going to be, but I would put really good money on there being right-wing goons all around the country standing outside of polls claiming that they're there to watch out for, voter fraud or whatever in the hell. There's going to be intimidation all the way around. This is not going to be a clean and fair, free and fair election. It's just not. There's going to be too much stuff happening, from the Postal Service thing to long lines to voters being suppressed. And that is just how it's going to be. And there's going to be these right-wing militias who are going to be at these polling places. That's going to happen. It's going to be really, really ugly. And I just want to remind everyone, in 2000, man, when did they start saying that? I guess that was 2008 with Obama. They were saying that like the new Black Panther Party was intimidating people at poll places, because I think they were at like one poll place maybe or something. It's projection. And it's the type of thing that they're totally going to engage in. They're going to have paramilitary groups out in the street. I'd put almost every dollar I have on that. Will this be the next Great Depression? Real possibility, because there's not much standing in its way. Because one of the things that has happened continually, and I didn't know this until I wrote American Rule. So that, by the way, it's coming out like 15 days, 16 days, I think. Terrifying having that book out in this environment, I tell you. This economy constantly crashes. It was built to be unstable. I mean, it really was not built to be a stable, self-maintaining thing. And eventually, with FDR and the New Deal and all that, they were like, oh, with Keynesian economics, we have to modulate this thing. We have to control it, because it just destroys itself constantly, and it destroys the society with it. Happened one time after another. I couldn't even tell you how many crashes we've had, because it is inherently unstable. It's just going to continue doing that, particularly, post-Reagan, where we don't even look at the economy. We don't even look at the market. We don't even police it or try and do anything with it. So yeah, there's every reason to believe that there will be some kind of major crash unless we're very, very careful. Jessa says, our thoughts regarding those that are thinking of leaving the country temporarily or for good if Trump gets a second term. Do you know anyone who has done this when he was put into office the first time? Have you heard from people who want to leave but can't? I'm going to say something. I want to be honest about this for a second. I know some people who, they're some of the smartest people I know. And one of them in particular, I'm not going to name him, but he works with people who have been affected by authoritarian regimes, people who have been oppressed, people who have survived genocides, people who have survived crackdowns, all that stuff. And he's not just one of the smartest, kindest, decent human beings I've ever met, but he's a realist. Because here's the thing, when you work with those people, you would think in a way that you become paranoid or whatever, but what ends up happening is that you become very settled and you start putting things into perspective, right? You don't all of a sudden start screaming, Auschwitz or something like that. He told me not too long ago, well, the way he put it to me was this. He said to me, he goes, what's your plan? And I was like, what do you mean, what's my plan? He's like, what's your plan when this thing falls apart? And, I'm not leaving. I refuse to give this country over to these people. It's not their country to have. I mean, listen, the entirety of the American myth has just been a lot of rhetoric and a lot of buzzwords and a lot of mythology. But, it's not their country to take. And here's the sad truth. And we have some Canadian questions, actually, so I'll answer that in a second, too. I have to tell you, with rising authoritarianism and fascism around the world, because it is a growing movement, and it's connected, and it is coordinated. If this country goes down, a lot of other countries are going down too. And what ends up happening in world history and with all this stuff, I mean, we've seen it before. This stuff has a tendency to flow over borders. It has a tendency to take over entire ways of thought. It changes reality as we know it. I mean, global consciousness is really malleable. There's a lot that could end up happening. But yeah, I'm not letting this country go down without a fight. And I understand people wanting to go, and if people don't feel safe, I totally get that too. But I'm not gonna go. And if it comes down to going, it'll be because I'm running. You know what I mean? Because that's what ends up happening is they come for you. So we'll see. Next up, Nancy says, how bad is law enforcement infiltrated by white supremacists and nationalists? It's riddled through with them. I mean, even the FBI has looked at this stuff and they've said we have so many white supremacists in these things that they have become more or less threats to public and national safety. One of the problems that we have, and somebody's going to ask about police here in a second, but one of the problems we have is that the way that law enforcement and also the military are set up is they're set up as organs of white supremacy and fascistic violence. So they attract white supremacists and people who want to dole out fascistic violence. We have to change that. And if we don't change it, there's no coming back from it. But they are riddled through with these people. David says, do you believe police in the U.S. are something that can be reformed at this point? We have to completely change the way that we look at police. We have to start understanding that they're not there as some sort of oppressive unit where they shouldn't be, but they should be members of the community who are engaged in a communal effort. We have to change completely the way we look at them. And this is something that needs to happen on a cultural level. We need to completely reconsider what law enforcement is, what the military is supposed to do, all of that stuff. And we have to do it. We have to do it very quickly, and we have to completely reorganize how we think that law enforcement is supposed to work and how we think that these bodies are supposed to maintain themselves and what they're supposed to do for society. So do I think it's something that can be reformed? Yeah, I think that major things like law enforcement can be reformed over a major amount of time. We've seen big, giant social institutions change in big, giant ways, but we have to start being realistic about who they are, and what they're supposed to do. Cops are a cult. What can be done to stop cops from teaming up with right-wing militias to intimidate, injure, murder protesters as unrest spreads? So first off, I just want to say, as always, we're seeing these white militias joining up with law enforcement because they have the exact same mission, which is to oppress people of color and keep them from doling out violence, or their allies from, doling out violence, which they believe because they believe in these conspiracy theories. What can be done is we, as a culture, have to start talking about it. We can't tiptoe around it anymore and wring our hands over it. We have to understand where these people came from and what they're doing. We have to reckon with our history. And the more that we don't reckon with our history and the more that we wring our hands or are terrified of calling it what it is, the worse that it gets. These people gain power and they are emboldened in the shadows. We have to talk about what it is and what they've been and what they're doing. Angeline says, why isn't Congress acting on the many ongoing violations of law rather than what appears to be only tweeting about them? So here's the problem, is that Congress has been made completely toothless, and the Democratic Party has relied on Donald Trump as the single most effective means of fundraising. You'll notice that every time that Trump breaks one of these laws or breaks a norm or an institution or he violates the Constitution, you look at your email and you've got like 5, 6, 12 to 20 fundraising emails. It's like a wrestling match. They make a ton of money off of Donald Trump. They are completely incapable of holding him responsible because Republicans don't want to use their oath anymore. And as a result, the opposition doesn't have a lot to do. They just don't. And they want to fundraise off of it, and they want to figure out a way to win elections with it or whatever. But they need to start getting real about this thing. They need to start calling it what it is. Because this isn't a fundraising opportunity. It isn't an opportunity to, make sure that your voting base continues voting for you. You have to actually treat this like the existential societal political crisis that it is. August says, how dangerous is Eric Prince and how likely is it that he will turn his militias loose on Americans with the support of Trump/Barr? August, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to answer this in probably an unconventional way. I think that he already has. We've already heard the reporting that Eric Prince has been engaging in private intelligence against the American people. Not to mention his militias have been seen and have reportedly been seen in all of these protests. Eric Prince is going to play a major role in all of this. I think he already has, but I think when this thing comes down, you're going to see his sort of private militias or whatever you want to call them, intelligence opportunities or whatever. I think that is going to merge with Trumpism. And I think it's been there all along. I think they're going to, and weirdly enough, I've been doing research lately on like ancient times. You see in all of these societies, you see where there's like a group of people, mercenaries or hired soldiers, and they get brought in as like a private guard, or they're sent out to do the bidding of like emperors and, the precepts or whatever. Yeah, they're going to play a major role in this thing. And I think that they already have. Eric Prince is Betsy DeVos's brother. The Secretary of Education, her brother, is the head of a major right-wing for-hire mercenary group that is engaged in intelligence gathering and subterfuge of left-wing groups, which is the kind of thing that happens in fascistic authoritarian states. That is what we have to look forward to. And by the way, if like your door ever gets knocked down in the middle of the night, it's probably going to be somebody like Eric Prince on the other side of it. Elizabeth, can you comment on this article? And by the way, this was the article that said that there was not a proper investigation into Trump and Russia. Does this mean that no one in the U.S. government has properly investigated Trump's financial ties to Russia? No, nobody has. And that's the whole thing, is actually what you got with Robert Mueller. It was an investigation, and we got some, revealing facts out of it. It wasn't an actual, like, criminal investigation. It's like all these things. It was a passion play. It was something to talk about on TV. It was something that, that politicians could argue about. We have not actually dealt with this thing in the criminal and investigative way that they need to be dealt with. He is rotten to the core. He is completely corrupted in every possible way. And I think at some point or another, if the truth came out about Donald Trump and what has happened, oh yeah, Pinkertons. I'm so glad you brought that up, Concern. Pinkertons were a group, by the way, of like Eric Prince type mercenaries that like the robber barons would pay. And they would like break into like unions and organizations like that. And they were also like mercenaries that fought in the streets, which, by the way, during the Gilded Age, like you actually had moments where like unions and strikers and these organizations would actually fight wars with Pinkertons and National Guard members in the street. You want to talk about another moment where civil war was a possibility. Dan Cafaro. Dan Cafaro, by the way, cheers to Dan Cafaro. I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for Dan Cafaro, and I hope that you can oblige me for a quick moment. Dan Cafaro published my first book of short stories, which changed my life for forever and into all things, was incredibly supportive. And then when later on in 2015, I was working on this novel that just didn't work, and I wanted to cover politics. I called Dan Cafaro and I said, hey, I'm going to go out on the campaign trail and I'm going to cover the 2016 presidential election. Even though it seemed boring at the time, it's probably going to end up being Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. And I said, would it be all right if I wrote about it on your website? And he was like, oh yeah, absolutely. Let's do that. And then I went out and covered the Trump campaign. And that is one of the few reasons why anybody is hanging out with me tonight. So cheers to Dan Cafaro. I owe him so much, and he's one of the kindest humans. So cheers. Dan Cafaro says, what do you say to family and friends who remain loyal to Trump, insist that he's not racist, and all liberals want to do is tear it all down? Okay, so here is sort of my standard strategy with this. When people say that stuff, again, that like Trump is perfect and that he's not racist and that liberals are traitors and all this stuff, what they're doing is they're engaging in trench warfare. And you'll notice that the thing that they do is that they'll always reply with, I actually have 3 books of short stories. The one I was talking about here is An End to All Things. Yeah. But when they engage in trench warfare, they respond with headlines, right? These like quick little Twitter-sized headlines of what they believe about Trump or things that they've been told or things that they've been fed in this propaganda. And so what you can do to short circuit that is you can just call like a truce on the trench warfare, right? Because it's game theory. They don't want to give you a moment. They don't want to give that or that or that. And so what I end up saying is I'm like, listen, just to put things on the table, like I'm not a Democrat. I gave up my membership in the party when I looked at the history of them. I have a problem with what Democrats have done in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean that they're as bad as Republicans. This isn't equivocal. It doesn't mean that both sides of whatever. But then I start saying, here's my problem with this. Here's my problem with that. Here's my problem with that. And it completely de-arms them because they're no longer fighting in a trench warfare, game theory, zero-sum competition. And what ends up happening is when I start saying that stuff, they trust that we're both on the same side, which is there's us and then there's them. And what ends up happening is they end up telling you, they're like, oh yeah, I don't really like Trump that much. And yeah, no, I think Trump's got a lot of problems. And I actually think the Republicans are kind of full of shit. And so when you call a truce on that trench warfare, game theory, zero-sum conversation, you start remembering that you are on the same side because the people at the top are the people who are using you and oppressing you and, you know, consolidating power and profit over you. So when you start moving past that, you can actually start having real conversations. Oh, it is not. Yeah, whataboutism. That's exactly right. What was your favorite band of the 1990s? I have a lot of them, but one of the most unsung bands of the 1990s that I have a real soft spot is Oasis. I loved Oasis. Oasis is great. Okay. Honest Rocker says, my dad thinks all Dems are radicals and wrote me this week. I don't like Trump's demeanor, but I like Pelosi, Schumer, and Swalwell even less. Demeanor, Jesus Christ. He said he was just as scared of Biden win as I am of a dump win. He has a master's degree. What the hell? So one of those things is that, I mean, I don't know about Honest Rocker's dad, but this is probably somebody who has voted for Republicans in the past, I would have to assume. And eventually what ends up happening is if you vote for Trump, you actually throw in your identity with Trump. And that's one of the things is he consumes you in totality. Like if you voted for Trump, you kind of own Trump. And like if he fails or if he's awful, then that means that it reflects on you and who you are and you made mistakes. And so all of a sudden it questions who you are and all of the decisions. And all of a sudden your identity starts coming into question. I would assume that if you made it seem like your dad, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if he suddenly regretted Trump, if you talk to him. And by the way, a lot of this is based in masculine insecurity. But if you made it feel like that, I assume he'd probably tell you that Trump does really suck. I would have to say that. Tool is pretty good. What side of the Oasis divide? I like Noel better, but Liam is right. He wants to reconcile. Actually, I one of my biggest regrets, and nobody cares that I'm going to talk about this, but, you know, whatever. It's my live stream. I was a huge Oasis fan, and I actually had a ticket to go see them live, and they got in a giant wreck in Indianapolis, Indiana on the day that I was supposed to go, and they canceled that. So I never got to see Oasis live. I got to see Noel live. He was really, really good. But, yeah, it's going to be one of the things that I really, really miss. And I miss the 90s too. I was listening to some 90s music the other day, and it just sounds different. Like it's like there's not as much weight back then, right? It was like life just seemed sort of simple, and like the American Empire was totally fine, and everything was going to be totally great. Yeah, it was a lot. All right, Hudson Valley Astrologer, please comment on Republicans who might protest by not voting. Chatter about hardcore voters, I think, misses an obvious vulnerability. Can Trump really make up the difference with them? I haven't heard about that. But I have to assume that that was bad. I have to assume, like in 2016, that there was a group of people who went in to vote, and they didn't actually vote for Trump, but they wrote in somebody like George H.W. Bush or John McCain or something like that. I have to assume that there are going to be Republicans who don't vote for Trump. I have to assume, because, I mean, he's just abandoned anything even approaching a principle that party used to have. And I don't think that, I think a lot of them truly believe that they were part of a party with principles, but that's not what the Republican Party is. The Republican Party is now a fascistic white identity movement. That's all they exist for. This is larceny. It's pretty good. Ryan, what are your thoughts on truly viable third party being formed after this election? Okay, so here's what I think is going to happen. And people who have watched some of my coverage or listened to the podcast, I assume have probably heard me talk about this. So, like, let's say that Joe Biden wins. If Joe Biden wins, I think that we're going to see a small civil war, demolition derby within the Democratic Party, particularly if they win back the Senate. And the Democratic Party constantly has these generational civil wars. They just happen all the time. I have to assume the left and the more moderate Democrats are going to sort of have it out, and they'll kind of determine where this thing is going to go. And there's going to have to be a lot of reconciliation. There's going to have to be a lot of deals. There's going to have to be a lot of sort of coming together on things like either the Green New Deal or whatever they're going to do in the wake of Donald Trump. If the progressive left wing of the party feels like it's not heard or it doesn't have a place at the table, that could be a problem. Because I'll tell you, a lot of progressives do not like Kamala Harris. A lot of them feel like they've been betrayed, particularly, with Bernie Sanders' candidacies over the past 2 elections. There is a possibility, depending upon how America goes and what happens economically, that the Democratic Socialists could gain something. I don't think that means that they'll necessarily come up to the level of Democrats or Republicans, but I think you could possibly see that happen. I will say that with the Republican Party, much like the Tea Party in 2010, I think they're going to be totally consumed by QAnon. And I don't think it matters whether or not Trump wins or loses. I think if Trump wins, it'll happen a lot faster. If Trump loses, it'll be kind of, I think it'll be pretty ugly for a while. And I think eventually what you'll see is that right-wing media, particularly growing online presences and even like an OAN, I think the Tea Party has shown us that the Republican Party will sort of fight with the QAnon group and then eventually consume them and become them. I think that's what we're looking at here. All right, here I got some Canadians. First off, cheers to the Canadians. Thank you for joining. Seth, if Trump wins the election, should we here in Canada be worried? Mad Michael, as a Canadian, should I be afraid of Trumpism succeeding? Allison, another Canadian. What do you think Canada should be doing to prepare in case Trump steals the election? All right, let's talk about Canada. Here's the sad, sad truth, and I think any Canadian in this chat tonight probably knows this already. America's disease is seeping over the border. I mean, QAnon has taken hold there. You've got white nationalists there. You've got a lot of problems. You've got a lot of faux populistic white identity people up there as well. And obviously, I think Canada's politics will keep this from being here the way that it is here. But I'm telling you, if Trump wins and this movement just continues to grow and we don't stop it, it's going to sweep the world. It just is. That's the way this stuff happens. That's the way fascism works. And this is completely going along a neo-fascistic trajectory. So Canada needs to be worried. Europe needs to be worried. Britain really needs to be worried. Places like Greece need to be worried. France needs to be worried. This stuff is going around the world, and it's not an accident. These neo-fascistic groups are connected, they are organized, they're coordinated. They're doing this stuff in concert, and they're doing it in opposition to what we would call globalism. But the problem is they've created a false dichotomy. They're saying, oh, either you go towards white nationalism or globalism. You have to choose one or the other. I think it's a false dichotomy. We need to figure out something better. We need to jump off the neoliberal economy and globalism, and we need to find something realer and truer and more organic. We need to take care of each other, is what I think needs to happen. Alfonso says, why have we become immune as a society with 1,000 fellow Americans dying of COVID every day? Here's the problem. Leadership tells us to be immune. And not to mention that, but America just really doesn't want to look at things and really consider them very much. It's the exact same reason why all of these mass shootings, I mean, even a kindergarten class being destroyed, we can't look at it for too long, because at the moment we start looking at it and considering it and really thinking about it is the moment that the myth of American exceptionalism starts to be troubled. So we don't want to think about it. We don't want to deal with it. We don't want to really, really, really sink into it, because I have to tell you, our failure to deal with COVID isn't just a failure to deal with a pandemic. Our failure to deal with COVID is a sign of America's decline. Like, if you look forward, again, like history books are going to be written, you talk about the fall of the American empire, our problems with COVID, not to mention our struggles to define reality, are going to be one of the things that experts are going to be like, this is where America started falling apart. Again, I've been studying Rome lately for another project. This is what people do. They look at it and they're like, oh my God, this was madness in Rome. I can't believe they did this. It's so obvious that they should have done something else. That's what this is. And on the epigraph of American empire and American hegemony, they're going to talk about COVID. They're going to talk about this pandemic that everybody else got at least sort of under control while we pretended that it didn't exist. Then there's going to be all kinds of stories left and right about how Americans wouldn't wear masks and they were injecting bleach, or, you know, they were getting in fights in grocery stores. And it's going to be the discussion about how the American empire fell apart. And that is why we've turned the other way, is because there are so many people in this country who are in weaponized, radicalized denial about the fact that America is falling apart. That's who we are. That's what fascism is. When you start losing power and you want to deny it, you insulate yourself. You build a wall around yourself and you act like you're angry, or you are angry. By the way, we're going up on 1 hour right now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cheers, everyone. All right, we got a few more. Maria, Bill Barr hasn't been in the media lately. What do you think that SOB is up to? Destroying the law. I mean, he likes to be behind the scenes. He doesn't really like to go on TV. He doesn't like to give interviews. That dude is behind the scenes trying to figure out how to screw the election and how to destroy the rule of law. I mean, if you don't know where he is, it's like the shark in Jaws is what it is. You should be more concerned when the shark isn't on the screen, right? Because the shark is coming. So yeah, that's what Barr's up to, is destroying the law. MB Kalik says, let's talk about how we take back the narrative. The lines are getting blurred with all the street violence. So here's the problem. So what ended up happening in this country, particularly with BLM, is that, we'll talk about that in a second, Winston. That's a good question. So the BLM protest actually changed the narrative in the mainstream news and media, and it got all the attention and became the cause célèbre of America, right? The thing is, it kept going on and on and on and on. It had sustained movement and power. And in a sane country that worked, it would have been the main story for as long as it was happening. The problem was that the news media couldn't profit over it anymore, because it was like the same story every night. So they actually stopped going into the crowds. They stopped sending reporters out into it. They just went back, and I complained about this and screamed about this on Twitter. They would just have maybe a helicopter picture of outside or something. Well, they did their talking heads. They did their same stuff every day. It was terrible programming. It was really, really poorly done, and they missed out on something. But now the narrative has been changed, because the narrative now fits what Trump and everybody else has said, including Fox News. They now say, oh, America is anarchy and chaos, and it's all because of the liberals and all of this stuff. Well, it sort of fits, because the news was in the streets on the first couple of days of violence during the BLM protest, which, by the way, some of that violence was instigated by white supremacists and white nationalists trying to instigate more violence, right? So they stopped paying attention to it more or less after the violence stopped and after the people were in the streets. So the narrative has changed. The only way that you can change the narrative is to get back out in the streets, and you have to force them to pay attention. And you have to do things like you have to boycott the news. We have to have things like general strikes or mass movements and solidarity. That's the only way out of any of this stuff, is through mass action. That's the only way that we can ever get anywhere in this country. It is too late to write fairness doctrine into law. And by the way, if you want to understand how we got to this place in this country, the fairness doctrine is a good place to start. Sanders says, where does Trump rank among world history's most prolific cult leaders? So the problem here is that when we think about cult leaders, we think about small cults, with maybe a couple hundred people, or with like Jonestown, like a couple thousand or something like that. A lot of authoritarians are cult leaders. They build a cult of personality around them. There's like Stalin or Mao or Hitler. And we have a problem with that. We don't like mixing cults with politics, although the two are just inextricably linked. Trump has not killed, he's killed thousands in this pandemic, sure. We haven't seen the widespread disaster. We haven't seen such as like Nazi Germany basically committing suicide alongside the Fuhrer. He's not up there in that level, but I have to tell you, in his ability to sway people, he's pretty much untouched. It is, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. Concerned citizen, what do you think about Ivanka and Kushner's fascination with Joseph Campbell myth and grand narratives? I have to tell you, they're really frightening. They are really frightening people because they understand the esoteric nature of politics. Like a lot of us are sitting here and we're talking about like, oh, how do you get votes? How do you win an election or whatever? They're dealing with mythology. And if you actually look at people who have caused big, giant disruptions of time, history, and politics, and also led to widespread, I don't know, suffering, it's because they dealt with mythology. And they're dealing with mythology. It's a really weird thing that they're doing. I thought her speech at the RNC was chilling. And it wasn't just because of her ability to deliver it, but it was the trajectory of it. It was the focus of it. It was obvious that Ivanka Trump thinks that she's going to be president of the United States someday. It was really chilling. Fight for freedom. Are the Republicans ready and willing to go down with him? Absolutely, they are. They've pushed all of their chips onto the table. And if they are to back away now, like it would mean that they were wrong all along. And they're not going to do that. They'll go down with this ship. They will go down with this ship happily. And as they go down, they will say, no, this ship's not going down. Oh, that's not water. We're not dying. We're fine. No, they're going down with Trump one way or another. It doesn't matter if he wins, he loses. They are with him. Catherine, maybe you could recommend ways to volunteer to help defeat Trump. It's so easy to do things from home, and even just 1 or 2 hours a week can make a difference. Absolutely. Dial in for people, send text if you feel safe doing that, send calls, organize. You can volunteer for literally any group out there, although I would argue to stay as close to grassroots as you possibly can. The major nationwide organizations have grown so large that they're not necessarily as effective. I would pick the grassroots operations and I would volunteer like hell for them. Hadeen says, how do we prepare? What specifically should we prioritize preparing for? You should prepare for disaster, period. And this is one of those things where, you should be ready for a week of water and food at the bare minimum. America could fall apart. That's when the pandemic started, I was like, I'm gonna get a pantry where I can eat for a month and I'll be totally fine. I'll have water for a month or whatever, and hopefully things will get restored. That's what you need to prepare for, because this country, I have to tell you, I don't know if you've been paying attention, it doesn't really provide for its people anymore. You can have an earthquake, you can have a hurricane, you can have a wildfire, and they're not showing up to help you. Like, that's not what this government exists for anymore. The only thing this government has to offer you is violence when you get out in the street and you do too much. You need to be prepared to help yourself, and we need to change our mindset. And again, I keep saying this in all the podcasts and all the streams, all this stuff. Reaganism told us everything is top down. It's the wealthy and everything will trickle down and you'll get what you want and shut up and enjoy it. It needs to be ground up. We need to take care of ourselves. We need to become self-sufficient, and we need to start organizing with people around us. We need to rebuild the atomization of society. We need to find people who are like us and need us, and we can start forming communities that take care of ourselves. Jackie says, last night, Austin NBC ran a 30-minute video about news programming at WGN, balanced nightly. Sean Compton is executive vice president in the video. Reddy's very close to Hannity, wondering if it's another fair and balanced right-wing operation. Absolutely it is. No, you cannot trust. Here's the thing. If you put an R next to your name now, if you willingly call yourself a Republican, you own all of this. Like, if you can go to sleep calling yourself a Republican right now, this is on your conscience, whether conscious or not. If you are creating a right-wing network right now, you are trying to profit off of Trumpism. And if you're trying to profit off of Trumpism, you're part of the problem. And WGN has been moving in that direction for a while, and other groups are going to move in that direction, because I can tell you right now, the most lucrative idea in right-wing media is who will replace Fox News. And by the way, let me take a drink. Here's my hot take for the night, which is Fox News isn't right enough for these people. They still push white identity paranoia, the New World Order, right-wing propaganda, Oregon, all the time. They're looking for somebody to go further because they don't worship Trump enough, because they're not state-run propaganda. And Trump is looking around for everyone who could possibly become that state-run propaganda. And you're exactly right. OANN is candidate number one. But I assume WGN is probably trying to do that too. Shelley, when Trump wins in November, what will you do? Look to move elsewhere? If so, which countries are on the list? I do not think that Trump will win a free and fair election, although I do not know if the election will be free or fair, and that's a problem. I'm here. I'm here. You know, I was naive in 2016. I was covering the Trump campaign, and there were a lot of Democratic people and left-wing people and pundits who were like, "There's no way he's going to lose. There's no way he's going to win. There's no possibility." I thought I was going to hang all this up in 2016. I really did. I thought my political career, political analysis, and all that stuff, I thought I was going to hang it up like a coat. You know, it's like at the end of winter when you move into spring. It's like, oh, I don't need that coat anymore. I don't need that hat anymore. I hope like hell it's over. Oh my God, I hope like hell it's over. And I know there are people in the media who are like, I've heard them. I've heard them in person. They've told me, you know, when the camera is off, they've told me that, like, you know, Trump is what pays their bills and they don't know what they're going to do if Trump ever goes away. God, I hope he goes away. I hope he gets beaten. I hope Trumpism gets driven underground. And I hope that we can somehow or another find sanity again. If he wins, I'm here doing this. I don't know what else to do. You know, I don't want to get old and have someone ask me what did I do when Trump was running the country and not have a good answer. It breaks my heart, but I don't want to do that. And you know, I've dealt with a ton of harassment, intimidation, and all this stuff. I don't want to do that. I really don't. I don't want to look back years from now and think that I did something wrong. So if he wins, I'll be right here, and I'll be in America. And God help us. God help us. Jack, is there any historical precedence for an American leader brazenly fomenting violent civil unrest in American cities in order to win an election? Not like this. Nope. This is completely different. We're in uncharted territory now. Now, that does not mean that this isn't uncharted territory around the world, because we've seen this time and again. This happens in one failed state, an authoritarian state after another. This is the playbook. What we're watching right now, this is part and parcel. This is what ends up happening in far-right authoritarian fascistic states. It's what happens. And that's the problem, is no, America doesn't really have a precedent for this in presidential elections, because those people have always pretended to be above it. This is different. Unfungus Mungus asked me to talk about Neuralink. If you think for a second that I'm going to put a piece of shit plastic to control my brain in my head from Elon Musk, you have another thing coming. I think this is shocking and disgusting. And maybe there's something nearby or something coming down the pike that will help people and make people feel better, and maybe it'll help with all kinds of problems. I'm not trusting Elon Musk as far as I can fucking throw, period. Wes says, we only got two more. Wes, with Trump maintaining that mail-in voting leads to fraud and it being likely that he contests the election results if he loses, would it be better for folks to take the health risk and go vote in person? I've been struggling with this. I've been struggling with this. I don't know how to tell people what to do in that case. I keep telling people that maybe it's the best thing to vote in person, because that way the mail-in thing can't screw you over, because they're going to try and make that happen. I keep saying that I think if it was me, and this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to go vote in the morning, and that way I can be ready in the afternoon and the evening to march or be in the streets if necessary. We need to expect that this could be bad, and we need to expect that mass action might be necessary, and that the fate of the republic might be up to us being willing to take action and put ourselves on the line. I don't know. I think everybody has to make that decision about what they do, and I don't know. I'm gonna vote in person. I'm gonna put on a mask. I'm gonna go vote in person. I'm gonna get out of there, and then I'm gonna be prepared for everything to hit the fan. By the way, Muckrake Podcast, Nick and I are going to broadcast live during the election. If you want to join us, you can go over at patreon.com/Muckrake Podcast. We're building a community of people who are there for each other, and I hope that maybe you'll join us, because I don't want to be alone on election night. I want to be around my people, and I want to be there for other people. And I think it's going to be good that way. How likely is it that Trump could win, but we still take the Senate and keep the House, and he's impeached? I I don't see that happening. I think if he I think if he gets beat, we'll probably take back the Senate. I think there's a real possibility of that. Steven says, hypothetically, what if we're too far gone and we just have to let it run its course? That's a possibility. I'm not going to lie to you. This has been a conversation that, we've been having tonight. And let's be real about it, and let's be adults about it, and let's be mature about it. There is a distinct possibility that the American experiment has been so perverted and diverted and screwed up that, and by the way, if you haven't yet, you should read some Jean Baudrillard and start understanding postmodernism and the idea that meaning is gone and that all of this stuff doesn't really mean anything. And then eventually a society begins to consume itself and meaning is just absolutely evaporated. I think Baudrillard is a really important person to read right now. There's a real possibility the American experiment has reached a terminal case. There's a possibility that, like the fall of Rome, we could be looking at just the collapse of a society. That is a possibility. That is a possibility. And like our parties have shown us that is a possibility where we are. Our businesses have shown us that's a possibility. It does. It feels terminal. It does. But here's the thing. I am going to err on the side that it's not over. I'm going to fight like hell. Because here's the thing. Maybe there's a possibility we could right this ship. Maybe there's a possibility that because we're on that moment of precipice, something really bad or something really good could happen. I'm going to work really hard to try and make something good happen. I'm going to work my ass off to try and make something good happen. Because here's the thing. If it's just fated and everything's going to fall apart, then all we're going to have to do is the embrace of cold nihilism, and that's one thing. But I have to believe in hope. I have to believe that faced with decline and perversion and corruption, that maybe we might realize that there's another possibility. The biggest problem in this country, and I truly and honestly believe this, outside of white supremacy and patriarchal control and all that stuff, and I truly believe this, and I actually think it's not just this country, but it's the world. I think the biggest problem is that post-World War II, we have lost the ability to imagine a better world. We basically have created a world where we try and protect what we have, but we never want to try and have something more. Because if we try and have something more, we're either going to end up with like Nazism or communism or whatever. I think we've lost our ability to dream and hope. And that needs to change. We need to start imagining a better world, a world where we have basic human decency, where we have an economy that actually serves us as opposed to cannibalizes us and bleeds us and squeezes us dry and makes us miserable. We need to have a better world than where we can't even go to the doctor lest we have to declare bankruptcy. We need a better world where like 40% of Americans aren't facing evictions and possibly being thrown out on their asses. We need a better world where we actually treat each other halfway decently and like we care about one another. And we can do those things. We get told all the time that we can't do it, particularly by a group of people who depend on us not hoping for something better and not fighting for something better. But there's something better. I have to believe that. If I didn't believe that, I don't know that I could get up in the morning. And I've suffered from depression and anxiety, and I'm one of those people who have had dark periods in my life where it was hard to get up in the morning. I have to get up in the morning. I have to believe that this thing can be better. I have to believe that we can fight back the specter of fascism and Trumpism and find something better. I have to believe that. So yeah, is there a possibility that this thing might be too cooked to make it better? Yeah, that's a real distinct possibility. And I can tell you right now, after this week, and this week fucking sucked, man. This week sucked. Like watching the right embrace that kid and watching the right embrace like roving bands of idiots going out there and fighting and brutalizing and hurting people. That sucked. It sucked. And Trumpism sucks because it just steals from you the will to keep going. I think it can be better. I think it can be better. I have to believe it can be better because the antidote to all of this stuff, the antidote to Trumpism and fascism and authoritarianism is love and togetherness and hope. And I think that we can make a better world. I think we can figure out a better way. I think we can make choices. So that is where I stand. and I hope you're there with me. I hope you feel halfway decent, and I hope after this week that you find some joy and togetherness and solidarity, because we deserve it. We deserve better than what we're getting. We deserve better than this bullshit government. We deserve better than this bullshit economy. We deserve better than the scraps we've been given in this artificial austerity. We deserve better. We deserve better. Thank you for hanging out tonight. It was a hard week. It was a hard, emotional week. Y'all mean a lot to me. You really do. And doing this on like a Sunday, and I'm sitting here on a porch drinking bourbon and talking to a laptop. Y'all mean a lot to me. You really do. Just a couple of plugs, because I mean, what would I be if I wasn't going to plug a couple things here at the end of this thing? We got a new Muckrake podcast on Tuesday. I'm scheduled to talk to the author of a really good book about fascism. Hopefully that will come through on Tuesday. We'll have another episode on Friday. I think we're going to do a bonus episode with maybe a Q&A, something like that. If you want to help out with what I'm doing, number one, American Rule, How Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. It comes out on September 15th. I have to tell you, because we're drinking bourbon, I'm so nervous. The reviews have been really good, but also every time a new book comes out in the world, it's so scary. And this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It's probably the best work I've ever done in my entire life. So if you haven't already, please pre-order it. If you want to help out and support what I'm doing, also you can go over to patreon.com/muckrakepodcast. We're doing feature-length documentaries. We're doing a bunch of exclusive analysis and coverage. Everything you do over there helps, and thank you for everybody who has done it. You are the absolute best. Again, just because it's one of those nights and it's been one of those weeks, I appreciate you. And do not accept this bullshit. Do not accept Trump. Do not accept the Republicans. Do not accept neo-fascism and authoritarianism. You deserve better. The rest of your life should not be spent in this nightmare. You deserve better. You deserve better than all these scraps, and you deserve better than all this pointless, senseless cruelty. So cheers, everyone. It's been real. I will see you next Sunday, 8 p.m. I hope you hang out. Be good, be safe, be well.